breaking updates. Very important.
One thing about Snow White in particular has a lot to do with Rachel Zegler's firing situation. We already talked about how she was let go from various projects by the Walt Disney Company, including doing voiceover work for Toy Story 5.
I think it's fair to say that no one can stand the star of this movie.
And how Rachel Zegler disrespected the original and a classic from Walt Disney, something that completely saved Disney and changed the company and changed animation in general.
Now, ever since the debut of Snow White, it has been nothing more than a box office disaster, not just for the Walt Disney Company and Bob Iger as the CEO, but also for Rachel Zegler.
The reason we had Rachel Zegler on the docket is she's an asshole.
Because Rachel Zegler is a PR nightmare.
So one thing about Bob Iger is that we know that he is now in complete damage control mode as well as double down mode to really just try and attempt to fix this movie as much as possible, to lie to the audience.
This is truly, like, she has to go. I'm sorry, Disney. She has to go.
One major development going on now involves more to do with the Rachel Zegler firing situation that took place in her recent behavior toward both Disney and toward the critics.
Snow White, there's been an enormous amount of controversy surrounding Snow White, obviously.
This is someone who is as entitled as, I don't need your business. You know what? Maybe Disney does. Maybe you're a tool, you're a pawn in this film. You didn't write it, you didn't direct it. You have nothing to do with the creation of Snow White. Right. You should shut up and do the job.
Has there been a film with worse casting than this? And I don't just mean the Snow White actress. Obviously, she's terrible, but both of them.
So one thing about Snow White 25, as we know it, is that it is by far the worst iteration of Snow White. There is no doubt about this because of the storyline, because of the way it was created, the overall agenda. But let's be real, all agendas aside, putting the ideology over to the wayside, this is just a bad movie in isolation.
And now you better have a good reason to get people to the theaters, and this ain't it.
She's not like the ideal choice for the lead role in Sweet Snow White.
The acting, the producing, the directing, the writing, the cinematography, everything about it across the board is just lackluster. It really sounds, or should I say feels like, even looks like a fever dream. That's how bad of a movie it really is.
There's a reason why the public has shifted. If you can't avoid this movie, you absolutely should, because it's absolute trash. I know some people like this movie. Some people are stupid. Oops!
Oh, man.
Hello, Disney. You're going to have to redo your film again because this woman is a pig and you fired Gina Carano for far less than this nonsense.
Welcome back to Tea Time with Tina. They say Disney is the happiest place on earth, but Bob Iger seems to be feeling anything but sunshine and rainbows. In a move that's jolted the entertainment world, the Disney CEO allegedly fired Rachel Zegler, yes, the Snow White 2025 star herself, from all future projects.
One major development going on now involves more to do with the Rachel Zegler firing situation. She was let go from various projects by the Walt Disney Company.
Imagine a royal ball where the princess is suddenly told, your carriage is waiting, but it's here to whisk you off the payroll. That's the vibe swirling around the Magic Kingdom rumor mill right now. How did Disney's once-cherished live-action venture turn into such a fiasco? The official story is mired in creative differences, but insiders point to much more. A tanking box office, test screenings that triggered red alert sirens, and an online backlash so fierce, it would make the evil queen proud. Toss in some last-minute script rewrites, a massive budget going up in flames, and you've got yourself a recipe for one of the biggest controversies in Mouse House history.
Now, one thing about Rachel Zegler is that we know that she's not helping at all one bit.
So, buckle up. We're about to dissect the comedic chaos behind Disney's ill-fated Snow White remake, from the very moment Bob Iger said, "You're out," to the financial fallout that has everybody crying into their popcorn. Let's start with the moment that shook Tinseltown. Bob Iger, known for steering Disney through acquisitions of Marvel, Pixar, and Star Wars, apparently had enough. Early box office projections for Snow White 2025 rolled in, and the numbers were so underwhelming they made the dwarf's cottage look like a mansion in comparison.
Snow White is the lowest performing Disney movie in decades. No one waited in line to see it. Are you kidding?
Early estimates suggested that they would take in 48 to 58 million in the first weekend. Apparently, it did 43 million in its first weekend. But this live-action remake is a giant fail.
Think about it. This is a remake of Disney's first ever animated feature, an absolute cornerstone of the brand. Studio execs expected lines around the block, but rumor says the opening night felt more like a private screening.
Disney is hosting a Hollywood premiere of Snow White on March 15th, but the studio won't be rolling out a robust red carpet. That's right. The premiere is just, don't tell anybody. They have to do it.
According to whispers on the studio lot, Iger demanded an emergency meeting faster than you can say bibbidi-bobbidi-boo. The suits analyzed every angle. Test audiences bemoaned awkward pacing, unfunny jokes, and a muddled storyline. The marketing team apologized profusely for failing to conjure that old Disney magic. Then, to top it off, social media was ablaze with harsh memes and the dreaded "Not My Snow White" hashtag. Iger's patience apparently snapped. Whether through an impersonal email or a direct face-to-face, Rachel Zegler's contract got the axe. No more future princess sequels, no spin-offs, no cameo appearances in the next big crossover. Just a swift farewell.
She was let go from various projects by the Walt Disney Company, including doing voiceover work for Toy Story 5 as a character codenamed Spiral. She was also booted from the Pirates of the Caribbean remake, which I'm really starting to question whether or not that's even gonna be made by the Walt Disney Company anymore.
Behind the scenes, you guys know as well as I do that those executives like Spielberg are looking at that saying, Rachel Zegler can F right off.
Disney claims they're taking the film's underperformance very seriously, which is corporate speak for somebody's going to be scapegoated. Unfortunately for Zegler, that someone appears to be her. But she wasn't alone in this downward spiral. The entire production was brimming with drama, budget concerns, and what many are calling the Frankenstein effect. Speaking of Frankenstein, wait until you hear how many times they tried stitching this movie back together.
Given all the behind-the-scenes mayhem, I expected a Frankenstein's monster where scenes would be stitched together. I think a lot of these live-action updates are really hard to watch. They've really done so much stepping on rakes over the last few months with this project where the box office is just not going to recover.
Now, before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe because let's face it, I'm nothing without your support. Now back to the tea. If you've ever tried gluing a broken vase together, only to realize you're missing important pieces, you'll understand Snow White 2025. Early on, Disney touted it as a faithful yet modern retelling of the 1937 classic. However, after the first round of test screenings, execs panicked. Feedback ranged from clunky character arcs to wooden humor. So they ordered a wave of reshoots, hoping to salvage the sinking ship. Then the second wave hit. Then a third, with new pages flying in hot off the printer, rewriting entire character motivations and plot points on the spot.
Disney has botched this Snow White movie every way it's possible to botch the Snow White movie. So you'll recall that originally the Snow White movie starring Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot, you'll remember that that film had a trailer so awful that Disney had to completely recut the movie. It showed that the dwarves were not in fact dwarves in Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, because that would be offensive apparently to little people, so instead they just made the dwarves normal-sized humans, which was idiotic because that's not the story. Then they decided they couldn't actually cast, little people in these roles, so they decided to cast big people and then shrink them down using CGI, so it looks terrible.
Production insiders joked it felt like pulling an all-nighter for an exam, rewriting the essay while the professor's already collecting it. Some scenes were filmed multiple times, each with a different tone. One comedic, one serious, one feminist empowerment, one returning Snow White to damsel in distress territory. By the end, everyone from cinematographers to costume designers was scratching their heads. Which version are we using again? Naturally, a patchwork approach creates a patchwork movie. So when the final cut screened, test audiences had whiplash. One moment, Snow White was a strong, confident warrior, and in the next, she's starry-eyed and helpless. The dwarfs, some comedic, some stoic, some barely in the movie.
Did the dwarfs make it or no?
Well, the CGI dwarfs did. Of course, that goes back to the original controversy where Peter Dinklage, a very talented little person actor, said, "Why are we doing that?"
Every subplot seemed to contradict the last. And somewhere in all this chaos, Rachel Zegler's performance, once championed as Disney's next big thing, got lost in the shuffle. But a messy production was only half the battle. The other half was marketing hype versus harsh reality. They say Disney's marketing team can sell ice in a frozen palace, but this time, the wizards in the promotional department faced a challenge no campaign slogan could disguise. Disney plastered #1 movie in the world across billboards, social media ads, and streaming banners, perhaps forgetting that box office data can't be conjured out of thin air. Once people spotted practically deserted theaters on opening weekend, it was game over for the hype train.
From Daily Mail. Snow White and the empty cinemas. Embarrassing photos show deserted theaters with no bookings in prime time slots. Look at this one. So many people here to watch Snow White. To be fair, this clip right here actually was from a video where they show the screen and then show the audience is empty.
Meanwhile, the film's leading lady found herself in hot water, and not just because of the negative reviews. Social media had a field day. Tweets rolled in about how the evil queen is way more glamorous than Snow White.
There is another controversy, and this one's actually kind of funny, and that is most people have been complaining that the evil witch who is jealous of Snow White's beauty is substantially more attractive than Snow White.
Aspect of disbelief you have to suspend is the idea that Gal Gadot, as the wicked witch here, as the evil stepmother, is somehow less good looking than Rachel Zegler. Come on, gang, but we're not all blind. We can still see.
The merchandise, princess dolls, plush dwarves, even pricey collector's edition props, collected dust on store shelves. Retailers slashed prices to half off within the first week, some even offering buy one, get one free. And still no takers. It was like the universe had collectively decided that if Disney's own fans didn't believe the spin, no amount of pixie dust would salvage the situation. Here's where the meltdown truly escalates. Remember those rumored empowering monologues that Rachel Zegler delivered? Scenes where Snow White refused any form of rescue, forging her own path up a treacherous cliff.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
According to various sources, these scenes had been heavily promoted during filming. Zegler even hinted in interviews about her excitement to portray a more assertive Snow White. Then the final cut arrived, and those monologues mysteriously vanished, trimmed, snipped, or reshot into oblivion.
They could not make this movie work for the life of them, and now they're trying to bury it.
Disney was allegedly worried about leaning too hard into modern politics, potentially alienating half its audience. Result, they ended up alienating both halves. Traditional fans found the entire remake too edgy. Progressive viewers labeled it a half-baked attempt at feminism. Zegler, caught in the crossfire, expressed her disappointment in hush-hush, off-the-record chats, though rumor says her frustration was far from hidden. She suddenly became the scapegoat for the film's woes, a face easy to blame when the studio was desperate for an out. The opening weekend underwhelmed, pulling in less than $90 million if the most generous numbers are to be believed.
But this live-action remake is a giant fail. It is not doing well at the box office. When it comes to the Rotten Tomatoes score on this thing, even the critics are not in love with Disney's Snow White. It's clocking in at 44%. The cinema score, which is basically how audiences respond to the film, is a B+, which generally is not terrible, but it actually is quite terrible with regard to kids' films. Kids' films are graded on a curve. There's never been a Disney live-action remake that is graded lower than an A- except for Snow White.
Merch sales flatlined, plush dwarfs lingered unloved on store shelves, discounted so often that even bargain hunters weren't biting. Big retailers who had braced themselves for the next Frozen phenomenon ended up with surplus stock that's become a punchline in industry circles. Remember the Snow White meltdown of 2025? We've still got boxes in the back, collecting dust. Disney's financial analysts are now in hyperdrive, recalculating forecasts for upcoming projects. The ripple effect might hit everything from theme park budgeting to future film greenlights. Let's be real, nobody at Disney wants to see a repeat of such a monumental flop. The money lost here could have funded multiple smaller and potentially better received films. Speaking of big decisions, the fiasco has forced an even larger question. Who is Disney anymore? Inside the House of Mouse, some veteran creatives are grumbling. We used to capture hearts with simple, timeless stories. Now we're pandering to every trend. The sense of magic that once defined Disney, from hand-drawn animations to uplifting musicals, seems overshadowed by corporate mandates and brand synergy. Snow White 2025 feels like the ultimate cautionary tale. Overworked, overhyped, and underloved by fans. Some employees worry that focusing on spin-offs and remakes is crowding out truly imaginative projects. They point to how Walt Disney himself was once an innovator, not a mere reteller of past glories. In this climate, the fiasco has become a red alert signal. Do we keep milking the classics with modern spins, or do we chart a fresh path forward? If there's a silver lining, it might be that this dramatic flop could finally force the studio to examine its approach. Fewer cooks in the kitchen, more coherent storytelling, and genuine respect for what made classics magical in the first place could be the path to redemption. But with Bob Iger at the helm and Rachel Zegler out the door, nobody's sure which direction the ship will sail next. Meanwhile, Hollywood's keeping a close watch, worried that Snow White's downfall could spark an industry-wide rethink of reboots and sequels. So, is there any fairy tale ending here? Not exactly. Rachel Zegler, once Disney's hopeful new princess, left the stage under a cloud of corporate tension and online venom. Bob Iger is now seen by some as the one who pulled the plug on a star's big break. Meanwhile, Snow White 2025 will go down in history as a high-profile flop, proof that you can't just slap classic on a poster and expect an automatic success. It's also a cautionary tale for the entire Mouse House. Maybe it'll inspire them to rediscover that old spark, the one that made us fall in love with talking animals, magical kingdoms, and heartwarming stories in the first place. If there's one thing fans are yearning for, it's genuine imagination, not forced modern commentary or frantic brand pandering. As for whether Disney can bounce back, the mouse has weathered storms before, from theme park slumps to canceled projects that never saw the light of day. But this fiasco feels different, like a genuine crack in the kingdom's mighty walls. All eyes are on what Bob Iger does next. Will he double down on remakes, or let the dust settle and explore original narratives? Will new talents step up to restore the trust and enchantment that once defined Disney? Only time will tell. For now, we're left with memes, discounted merchandise, and a star who's likely not strolling through Disneyland with a complimentary fast pass anytime soon. In the end, perhaps the moral of this twisted fairy tale is that even the biggest kingdoms must tread carefully when rewriting a cherished story. Otherwise, you risk turning a dream as a wish your heart makes into a nightmare that fans definitely won't forget. Before you head out, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Disney can still salvage its reputation after the Snow White debacle, or has the magic mirror finally cracked beyond repair? Share your opinions and hot takes in the comments, and please don't forget to like and subscribe because it really helps us out. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay tuned, stay safe, and stay informed. Only on Tea Time with Tina.